Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And today I am joined by assistant editor Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hi, Eamon.
Hi, Jason. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And we are going to be having a conversation on this episode with Kirk Donahoe of MCA Connect. Kirk recently wrote an article for us focused on Dynamics 365 for finance and operations and Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 or ADLS Gen2 and the use of that data storage technology, data lake technology, with the future of F&O, right?
Absolutely. He brings his background as a solution architect and consultant manager for MCA Connect, which I look forward to hearing from him more about. And he's going to be talking a bit about the transitions from traditional bring your own database and data warehouse systems to ADLS or Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And so I'm very interested to hear what he has to say today.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he did a really nice job in his article. We've gotten some really good feedback on it. It's been a very well read piece that we'll obviously link to in the podcast description. And this is just a chance to expand on some of those topics. The rollout of data lakes for F&O, the broader use cases for it, Microsoft's direction, what it means for AX customers upgrading to F&O and a whole lot more. So, yeah, let's get into it. All right, Kirk Donahoe, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, and this was a great opportunity, I thought, for us to just dive a little deeper into some of the really interesting topics that you explored in your recent article about D365 finance and operations, and the I guess growing or soon to arrive use of Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 for many reporting purposes. It's a sort of an ongoing process of it being rolled out, introduced, and it's something that looks like it's going to impact almost all or most finance and operations customers eventually, right?
Definitely. Actually, most Microsoft customers. I heard at a recent Microsoft conference that really all of their products are going to be taking advantage of the data lake as a repository. So, just within finance and operations, we already see them moving the entity store over. Eventually, it's going to be the bring your own database entities. Business events are now available in there, but you'll see Dynamics CE is moving into the data lake. Even Office products are going to start storing contacts and different things in the data lake. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, I thought maybe we could, since we're talking about finance and operations and some of these some of the work that you do. Maybe we could just back up for one moment and could you tell people a little more about yourself, MCA Connect, the work you tend to do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm with MCA Connect. We're a Microsoft partner in 6 gold competencies, primarily ERP and CRM. We focus mainly on manufacturing and oil and gas, and I'm in the business analytics side of the business. Been there about 4 years. Designed our Data Connect solution, which was the original dimensional data warehouse that I designed off of AX 2012. It's been installed now from AX 2009, AX 2012, and then the same model with D365 F&O. About 15 different customers so far, and we've got a number of other projects that are about to begin with more rollouts of it.
Yeah, I was curious to ask Kirk about sort of the state of data warehousing and data lakes so far before the recent and upcoming introduction of Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. You mentioned that you've done a lot of work with bring your own database as well as with things like AX Data Warehouse. And I was curious if you could fill us in a little bit more about those.
Sure. So, originally we were able to have direct database connectivity, but that all changed with finance and operations. So, we originally built the data warehouse solution, which we branded as Data Connect, where we would pull data in off of a replica copy of the transactional database and structure it in a reporting format using the Kimball methodology, which is frequently referred to as a star schema. It's a dimensional modeling method that is optimized for performance and ease of querying. So we've had the model out there for approximately 4 years. And we decided to keep the same model when we moved over to finance and operations. But what happened was we lost the direct database access. So we ended up creating our own custom data entities and exporting everything out to a SQL database. Where we could still use that as the landing point to load our dimensional database model.
And in terms of why MCA Connect did this, as I understand it, tell me if I have this right, but really Microsoft's R&D team kind of made a decision to sort of take the entity store and the data access to a certain point, and then say to companies like MCA Connect and others, like, you can take it from here. You can design your own data warehouse or your own extraction, or own, I guess, maybe integration to your data warehouse solution from there, right? So that's where your company took that initiative, and I assume sort of probably there's others out there as well that have made efforts like that.
Yeah, so Microsoft's initial push in reporting with AX was with the internal cubes, the analysis services cubes, sales cube, production cube, and so forth. Those were based on analysis services multidimensional, and they've really gone away from the multidimensional analysis services model and invested heavily in tabular. So 2009 and 2012 had a bunch of out-of-the-box cubes. We've had some customers that have decided to try to use those cubes for reporting purposes. They really fall all over themselves when you get too much data. So we found it really only works for very small customers. So the idea was to extract all the data, load it into a relational database and a dimensional model. And then from there, we can build any reports against that. We could also point analysis services tabular at the relational model that we developed and load it up and build a different semantic layer on top of it. So the approach with F&O was the entity store repurposed the previous AX 2012 cubes and essentially materialized them into a relational database. The structure is basically the same, but it's not stored in a multidimensional cube anymore. There's a lot of the same limitations. You don't have the restrictions of complexity because MDX was just a very difficult language, and MDX was the language for developing multi-dimensional cubes. So at least that aspect is better. But the design is still a bit limited, and trying to jump across subject areas is difficult because the entity store entities are basically self-contained. So if you want to track a transaction all the way through, from a purchase order all the way to when it gets into manufacturing, and then when something goes and is actually sold and shipped, it's very difficult to do that without heavily customizing. Our solution gives you the entire picture across all the different modules, and you're able to jump easily across the different star schemas to the different fact tables to see all the related transactions.
Right. So entities, and that's maybe along the lines of what I understood about entity store, that it can be useful for sort of limited purposes, but for really deep analysis. Or I guess the other thing that maybe you pointed to in your article was if you have if you're trying to report on more than just F&O data, if you're trying to report more globally about your business operations, you really can't bring in any other data to build reports off of in addition to the
Correct.
entity store. So okay, so a few limitations there that are really significant for most companies.
So the entity store limitation on not being able to report on external data will be going away once the move to the data lake is out there.
Right.
But I still find the out of the box entities to be too limited, and they're really intended for aggregate reporting, not really detailed line level stuff. So some of the entity store customizations that we've done for customers have been really complete line level, every single transaction, rather than an aggregate or a summary like the base entities are. But
Okay.
we like the approach of the bring your own database, get everything out like we've always worked with it over time. You're sticking with SQL Server. Even when they make the transition to the data lake, I still see SQL Server or SQL Data Warehouse being important. There's still a lot of value around having a well-designed model, properly indexed. The data lake is going to be great for higher level business analysts who want to do self-service reporting and just kind of on the fly tying things together from tons of different sources. But a lot of reporting is still going to be, I need to know my sales trends over time. It's going to be, the typical fixed reporting style. And that I still see as being best served against a relational database.
Okay, so in other words, the data, and I'm trying, as a non sort of database professional, and maybe I can speak for Eamon too. I'm trying my best to keep up with you here,
I apologize.
but my understanding then is, the entity store, or I guess the entities will still be there in the data lake, but there will still be work to do if you want to do those kinds of reporting that you just discussed, and that not just anyone can sort of pull a report out of that's going to be meaningful. Some advanced users will be able to build their own reports, but there's still a need for some of the same requirements or same capabilities that like you said, a star schema data warehouse can provides today, and that doesn't really
Totally.
go away. Yeah.
Yep, totally. And it's really, in the article that I wrote, I referred to the modern data warehouse that Microsoft is pushing, and really the data lake is just it's a new staging area to land all the data. Historically, ETL was always really difficult. You had to have fixed format, develop, cleansing and routines and everything to get it into a very structured relational table, even just kind of, the raw data. And so it really limited the data that you decided to save or import. Whereas now the thought is just throw everything into a data lake and then we'll transform it from there. But all of the data that we have is valuable, just land it in there and we'll sort through it, over time. And so we still see the transactional data from F&O landing in the data lake, but I would still feel that belongs back in a relational database because it is highly structured data. There are other sources that are unstructured and variable that belong in the data lake and can't easily be merged into a relational structure because of the fluidity. But the ERP data is very structured and still belongs in a database, I think, in the end.
What would be some common examples of some of the kinds of unstructured data you'd find floating around in a data lake these days that Microsoft is really positioning these data lakes for?
So mostly around IoT and different sensors. We've got a number of projects that we're working on. We've done a couple of cool proof of concepts with, capturing sensor data that gets pushed into, like an IoT hub, and then we operate on it with some stream analytics and land it into previously blob storage and now into data lake. So you'll see just unstructured like JSON type data that has different sensor readings and so forth, primarily.
How are customers reacting so far, and do you have any predictions on how sort of the uptake of data lakes is going to go within the AX or the F&O community? It sounds like I know you've already said it sounds like that is Microsoft's direction, and they have a pretty strong vision on it already.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of conversations about the data lake recently. Customers definitely are aware that it's coming. Most of them are not hearing about it from the first time from MCA or myself. They're very curious, and my approach has been, if you've got an implementation going right now or you've got reporting needs, let's just stay the course, keep doing what we're doing, let some things shake out on the Microsoft side, get a little more mature. There's a lot of changes happening with pretty much every update. I just installed platform update 25 or 29, excuse me. And there weren't too much impact around the area, where I currently live in the data management framework. But some of the more recent releases from 23 to 24 to 25, there was a lot of big changes. And so I think it's safer to just keep going the bring your own database version 1 solution like we offer right now. It's going to be a gradual transition. I've attended several sessions from Melinda, who is kind of the principal program manager, I believe, over the data management section of F&O. And his advice has just been to, stay the course, and we will help you migrate over to the data lake stuff. And a lot of it sounds like it's going to be pretty seamless. That's the hope anyways, so we just got to see. But if you have reporting needs now, continue with the bring your own database version 1. The solution will continue to work. We may have to make some adaptations where we're no longer sourcing the data from an ODS or an operational data store where we export the entities right now. We may have to query from the data lake instead, but the end data warehouse model will not change, and then the reports will not be impacted.
Right. As I recall, I saw one presentation on this, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. And I think I wrote about it a little bit as well. But from Microsoft's sort of basic message there, part of it was you'll get some new Power BI reports too, or updated ones, something like that, like pre-built, but that it would require more, not to get into it too far, but that it'll require Power BI Pro licenses for more people. So there's a couple of sort of maybe cost factors there, although I couldn't really tell myself how significant those would be. You touched on it a little bit, that data lake at its sort of base level is not super expensive.
Correct.
Is that a concern though?
So yeah, right now with the bring your own database V1 solution, it can be, $1,500, $2,000 a month in Azure consumption for a reasonable size virtual machine, which is how we build our solution. You can certainly go to an Azure SQL DB and save some cost, but there's some limitations around going that route. By going to the data lake, it's roughly estimated about $20 per month for a terabyte of storage. So pretty cheap overall. And, a lot of ERP systems aren't storing massive amounts of data, at least most of our customers aren't. So the cost will be negligible. But I see, with the approach that we're recommending and that Microsoft shows with their modern data warehouse, is you would still incur the Azure costs around, SQL Server or virtual machine to run that. You could go SQL managed instance as well. But yeah, there's the additional costs. The customers are often caught off guard as well with, having to have Power BI Pro licensing. It's basically $10 a month per head. It's well worth it, and customers just can't get away with the free Power BI license in a shared business environment. It's just not enough.
Is that where you find most of your customers building their reports and dashboards today, based off of either based off of the off of your data warehouse or just out of the ODS?
Yeah, so the nice part about what a bring your own database solution is that you don't have to use Power BI, but I will say that every single one of our customers, with the exception of one, is using Power BI solely.
So I hear what you're saying about sort of the taking about a bit of a wait and see attitude when it comes to sort of how the various platform updates support data lakes. And I guess what is the other thing that you're going to be sort of watching for Microsoft's guidance on in not only enabling it, but if there's a point at which people have to switch over, or when that becomes like the default approach for Entity Store?
Yeah, so the entity store stuff, they're pushing everybody who's using it to the data lake in the near future. I saw what looked like on a timeline that October was going to be when they were going to get rid of the existing, because the entity store is currently stored in a relational database within the F&O Azure subscription as a separate database called AXDW. And so what Microsoft is doing is identifying ones that are not currently in use, and they're starting to remove those. And any of the ones that are in use, they're working on migrating over to the data lake. And I think what I saw was October is when that is all going to transpire.
Do you have any concerns about that?
No, not really at this point. It seems to be, pretty straightforward regarding the entity store stuff. They're able to monitor the usage of it very well right now. I think they've got a good plan for it. What I'm excited to see is when they start to make the move for the regular data entities for bring your own database version 2, as they've been referring to it, because that will impact our solution.
Okay. What about AX upgrades? Is there anything that Dynamics AX customers should be paying attention to in particular with regard to this, either timing related or just planning for moving their reporting ahead?
Well, so, the upgrades are always a big challenge. Previously with, AX 2012, it was, you choose when you want to upgrade, and it may not be very often. With the regular update cycle that Microsoft is pushing now, it's become a little more challenging on our end, because obviously we have our solution lives all the way downstream, and it's built upon expecting a certain structure of data. Different fields in different tables are expected to be there in order for our ETL process to load the data warehouse. Well, Microsoft is consistently adding new columns, deprecating columns. And so whenever an upgrade is applied, the data entities need to be checked to make sure that there's no impact from objects that are removed or columns that are removed. And so what we have in our solution is a way of extracting the configuration key where Microsoft marks objects as obsolete, which identifies that in a future upgrade cycle, those are going to be removed, so that we can be proactive in managing the removal of those before something breaks after an upgrade is done.
The question I had, Kirk, was sort of the role you see for some of the Azure data services, such as Azure Machine Learning or Azure Databricks, kind of fitting in with Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting, and that's really a big reason why Microsoft is pushing going this direction is, landing everything in the data lake, and then it'll be accessible to all the additional services, to particularly machine learning. There's a lot in the way of predictive analytics and different formulas that are out there and algorithms that can really open up a whole new world of reporting capabilities. Right now, most all of the reporting that we are asked to do is, past looking. Hey, how did we perform over time? And I really think the direction that Microsoft is taking us is going to allow us to be a lot more future looking and make predictions, and then measure ourselves against how accurate those predictions were. It's going to be pretty transformative for a lot of businesses.
How does something like, well, the other thing I think of with data lakes and Microsoft is the Open Data Initiative and CDS, which again, hitting up against my limitations on understanding the technology, but they also rely on, or they're also stored in data lakes.
Yeah.
And that makes me think, hey, do those sit side by side with operational data from F&O? Have you had any insight into that?
So I haven't personally worked with the CDS side. It's right now meant for sharing data across the different systems. So, a customer in CE can be the same as the customer in FO. Um, the common data model where I'm working is, it's commonly referred to as CDSA, and there's two different CDSA. So all of this gets really confusing.
Right.
There's CDS for applications, and then there's CDS for analytics. And so CDS for analytics is kind of the world where I live in, and it's meant for reporting purposes. The CDS that you were speaking of is really for sharing data between the two transactional systems. And I don't think there's much overlap there, other than they both do use a data lake in order to accomplish their goals.
Yeah, I've had a hard time tracking what the CDS for analytics has evolved into. I hear about data streams. Is that the right term? Or data flows?
Yeah, well, there's data flows, there's data pools it's difficult to keep up with. I guess Microsoft marketing just has fun coming up with these things. There's always been a lot of confusion, even around entity store and the data entities that we build. So bring your own database has data entities that are in the data management framework, but then the entity store is there and it's stored inside another database. And then you got the terminology is confusing as can be, and it's always changing and rebranding. And so it takes a lot of effort to try to stay on the forefront of where everything is.
Yeah, and I'd have to think, if I was an F&O customer, I'd want to make sure I had my head around these concepts as well as I could, because I mean, any decision you make about a project or an investment in these things is going to sort of play off of those, all those elements and the implications of what each one can and can't do. I mean, the CDS one's a good example. I mean, there's like I understood your point, and I was sort of I can see how, but it's easy to sort of conflate the two,
Yeah.
even though they're very different, transactional versus sort of for reporting.
Yep. No, it's a lot to keep up with. Our customers are, very concerned about it. They want to be sure that they're making the right decision. It's a decent sized investment to go down a certain reporting route, and they want to be reassured that this isn't going to be all thrown out in 2 updates down the road.
Right.
And so I spend a lot of my time having conversations around, where Microsoft is going. I spend a lot of my time reading up, exploring, preview updates before they come out, making sure that there's not going to be any changes, going to conferences, joining all sorts of different webinars, being involved in, the preview programs for different products. We get a lot of insight, being a close Microsoft partner, we hear about things well before they're made public. We participate, and we learn a lot of things that are under NDA. And
Sure.
So it's always, it's nice to know where things are going. You've also always got to be careful not to disclose anything, of course. So we're very future looking.
Are there areas that either you are advocating for to Microsoft, or that you think customers should be advocating for to Microsoft, in terms of just making life easier as an F&O customer? Things Microsoft could be doing or focusing on to increase value, lower the amount of work it takes, and the amount of investment it takes for customers to get where they want to go?
Well, one thing that I pushed for a long time, I never really got any traction with it. And I know other partners in the same arena as us were pushing for the same thing. I don't think it would have been difficult to accomplish, and it would have made everyone's lives a lot easier over the last couple of years. But there's functionality built into Azure where you can replicate a SQL database just basically through the Azure portal. And if Microsoft would have just allowed you to configure a reporting replica to be pushed to an Azure SQL DB that they handled, it would have been a couple of clicks and pushed to a separate database and use that as your reporting copy, and boom, you're done. We wouldn't have had to go through the route of the data management framework, building out all the custom entities, creating the export job, pushing everything, making sure that the batch jobs that schedule the recurrence are always running. Life could have been a lot easier. But I think in the end, now we're going to end up with a very similar type solution with the Bring Your Own Database version 2, where it'll just be in the data lake rather than a relational database. But it was a long time coming to this.
Well, I think, Kirk, you've given a great overview of things. I don't have any additional questions to add.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys so much for the time.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and also, thanks for the article. It's gotten a great response from our readers, and hope we can do it again with you soon.
Awesome, appreciate it.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Kirk Donahoe for joining us today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. And Eamon, how can people reach you?
You can reach me anytime at earls@msdynamicsworld.com.
Great. And until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.